Hey, folks, welcome back to the Pulse. My name is Matt. This is Crypto Heartbeat, and it is 11 o'clock Central Texas time. It is Stephen Friday once again. I hope you had a great 4th of July yesterday. It's the 5th of July today, and we're talking about freedom, real freedom. What is true freedom? Steve's got a lot to say about that. I was super blessed to review this content and be prepared today for you. And you know why it is? It's because Peggy's here. What's up, Peggy? Shout out to Peggy. Mike is here. Hi, folks. Hi, Matt. Hi, Steve. Hi, Jesus. Blind Mike here, folks. Mike Ostell is challenged with some sight issues. I know he's going to get those things worked out, but he would appreciate your prayers and support. Mike, it's so great to have you here. And your guest on the Pulse today is Peggy. Right side up with Peggy and Mike and Steve and all those folks. So welcome to you. Ego Foundations here. Hello with Humphrey, Taryn. Blessings all. Good to see you, folks. We're gonna be. I'm super excited today. We're gonna actually bring our buddy Ray in as our guest at the end. He's gonna be paying close attention to what's going on, and we're gonna get some of his commentary. But some amazing things are happening in this world, and you know what? The number one thing I want to ask, and the number one thing that I'm always reminded of is, Jesus, how do you see this? Whatever you're going through, whatever the situation is, how do you see this? Best thing, greatest thing Steve ever taught me, right? Go ask him yourself, dude. I'll encourage you, but he's the he's the source. So go to the source. So today we have this is from a clip that we've never shared before. It's out of episode 7. Okay. And I think this is really poignant to today because of freedom and all that kind of stuff, but it's packed with so much. So let's just dive into that right now. And then we will come back and have a conversation about it. But I'm going to get my notes ready. So here we go. Steve Staggs, the beardless Steve Staggs on this one. It's, you know, when like you ring a bell, I think about a big bell, right? And you hit it hard and it just resonates and it continues to ring.
Yeah.
That's what this feels like to me. It feels like it resonates so deeply. And you know how sound travels?
Yeah.
It's not pointed in a direction. It's out and it continues to propagate. And I sense that the things that are true resonate with our souls, right? And the neat thing about this is I just sense that internally, right? When I come to understand these things, it's like it's a breath in. It's an awe, but it's also a resonating, but it also leads to more questions. And it's like, well, go to him and ask him. And I think one of the cool things, Steve, about just how God has gifted you and your discipline of following him and the fact that you've been a professional baseball player in some strange sort of ways, those disciplines are being applied to seeking seeking the face of God and asking him, hey, what do you think about this? And to think that he would, and I think that's the big promise in all this stuff. You know, this isn't reserved for just Steve. And I think that's the amazing thing about this is that, what are the implications of all this, Steve? And I think about like where we are in just the times we live in, and then to think of the tools that he has put in front of us. And then when you start saying, okay, tools are animated for good or for evil, right? Some people are like, Chat GPT is the devil. And I'm like, well, actually, I use Chat GPT to help me do my punctuation and it really helped me like have an editor. But I didn't use Chat GPT to, find ways to, murder people. I mean, I could animate it in a lot of different ways. And then I think about crypto and I think about, okay, these people got into this stuff. It's almost like, and you pushed back on me on this one a while back around this idea that him would leave the 99 and come to get the one. And is Jesus really pursuing us? And I think he really pushed back on some of that thoughts or chasing after us. But there is something that seems like he constantly is trying to get our attention. Do you agree with that? Like, it just seems like he's everywhere, and especially as people open him up and say, "Hey, is this really true? Is what this stuff Steve is saying, is it really true? And that, can I really ask you?" And that it doesn't have to be through the context of some, well, you have to be a Methodist in order to do this. And you're like, no, I could just like do this on the side of my bed, or I could do this when I get up in the morning and have some coffee, or I could do it right now. And what do you think about that? Do you think that Jesus is actively pursuing people?
Well, he just is. I mean, he is the shepherd. So guess what? The shepherd, he takes care of his sheep. One of his sheep was in trouble. So he went to take care of his sheep. See, so yes, he is everywhere in the sheep concept. He is there as the good shepherd. He takes care of and leads the sheep. But the sheep, if you will, there's a reciprocating element to it. And the sheep gotta want to do it. The sheep gotta want to be cared for, right? Jerusalem, Jerusalem, I would have gathered you like chicks, like a mother hen gathers her chicks to protect, but you would not accept it. You did not recognize the day of your visitation. Well, why not?
Kicking at the goads.
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds, and now we could point the finger at their failure. Or we can say, well, Jesus, what was actually going on there? What was happening there from your point of view? I use the vocabulary that you are here to change things. Are you really here to change things? No, Steve. I'm here to complete things. I am here to complete my Father's vision. And every time I speak, I am speaking another creative act. I am creating and completing in those who are interested my Father's vision. Steve, are you interested? Is that something you're interested in being a part of? If you are, just ask me. I'll show you how to get there. I'll totally equip you. I'll totally train you, but you got to get in the game. You can't learn to hit the curveball unless you face the curveball. See, you can't be in the game unless you're willing to accept the risk of the game. See? Come on, this is okay. You'll be fine. But you have to be interested.
Yeah. Well,
I'm not changing the world. I'm completing the world. Do you want to be a part of that completion?
Well, there's so much here. And I come back to Jesus pushing back from the shoreline because there's so many people, and he gives them an agricultural story. And then we had this conversation privately, but you said the term that's used for church is ecclesia.
Yeah.
And what does it really mean? And what's the definition?
It is one who has been called out from and to him. So it's a bidirectional word. It means not just called to, but it's called out from one to another.
So think about this, folks. The term that's universally used in the scripture that you're likely reading is the word church. And then there's definitions, I think, that we've applied to those and made assumptions that church is like that building in Acts 2:42. There's certainly benefits of community. But what I think is really illustrated so well in the word ecclesia is that in all the definitions of the difference between weeds and wheat and sheep and goats and those that would fall and those that don't, is that he revealed. And folks, I think this to me is so big because it's so big for me, is you said a lot of the people went home after they heard a great story from Jesus and said, that's a great agricultural story. But there are those who are defined by him as the ecclesia, the ones that were called out and to him.
Yeah.
And he revealed to them what it meant. And what I look at you, Steve, I go, you're somebody who didn't go home. You just kept running and chasing after him, going, what do you mean by that? Yeah. And in a strange sort of way, you're doing exactly the same thing they did. Hey, what do you mean by that? I don't really quite understand that thing. Okay. If you're willing to chase after me, I'll tell you.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I have learned this vocabulary. Jesus, I know you got more up your sleeve than what you just said. What is it?
Yeah.
See, and now it's kind of somewhat of a game because, and I'm going to use a term that you and I have talked about before. I'm no longer crab walking.
Yeah.
See, when you first start, you have to really exercise almost an exaggeration of effort in order to get the body and the mind and the spirit trained in this new way of living. See, living from the mindset that he's changing to living to the mindset that he's finishing. Wow. How does that work?
You know what's so amazing is, I was just thinking about this, somebody's like, I'm going to be a pastor, right? And I'm going to start a church, right? And I think about this idea. Well, let's say you started a church and you said, you know what, we're going to teach this stuff, Steve. We're going to teach people that we're going to follow after God. We're going to be those who listen to his voice. He's alive and he speaks. And we're going to go in this direction. This is what we're going to be about. and all the things we talked about, a group of people comes together and they say, "Yeah, let's do this." Do you know how threatening it is to the pastor when the people actually follow Jesus? Do
Yeah,
you know how
well,
threatening that is to all of the foundations of things? And it almost immediately puts enmity between those who are actually following him and the one that's trying to control. And what's amazing is this seems like this, and then not to say that the intent of the person that want to be the pastor, but what's happening is it seems like the structures of man's creation wants to regulate. And it looks like Jesus says, no, 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 no. I'm not a God of regulation. I'm a God of freedom. And I think one of the things that's amazing is I've been so frustrated by that, and I think a lot of people have been frustrated with whatever local church or whatever thing they got experienced was that it didn't match up, and it didn't feel like freedom. It didn't feel like abundance and joy. It felt like I am not doing the right thing to fit in here, and that's not what Jesus is saying at all. It's just
well, think about how Jesus described himself, and then how we are taught to interpret that. He said that I don't go except as my Father sends me. I don't work unless I see my Father working. I don't speak unless my Father commands me to speak. I don't teach except what my Father gives me to teach. I do nothing, not one thing apart from my Father. Now, you know what we are trained to think that that sounds like? Being
slavery.
enslaved.
Yeah.
Oh man, you're so bound up, you're so a slave. Well, no, because Paul makes this little statement that where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty, there is freedom. Well, Jesus, what does freedom look like to you? What does it look like to you to be free, to be a free man?
Yeah.
Steve, it's having the ability to please my Father. That's what it is to be free.
And what's our definition? Is going our own way.
Just doing whatever we want, when we want, how we want.
Well,
Well, take that to your rule. If
Yeah.
I'm going to rule with you, how am I free? How am I liberated in my rule? You're able to please the Father in your rule with Him.
and that's according to how it was created. You
Yeah.
know what's amazing too? You think now about sovereignty and you think about freedom, you think about political, you think about the things that we're involved in. And it now makes it so clear that what you're constantly being offered is things that are you trying to gather power yourself to go your own way. And what's interesting is I think back to kind of the original founding, right? And a lot of people want to say, well, so and so wasn't a Christian or they're a theist and all this kind of stuff. And this breaks down all those barriers. And
Yeah.
it basically what's really interesting is one of the phrases that always rings in my ear is when a man is ruled from within, he doesn't have to be ruled from without, meaning the state. And one of the things that was at the foundation of the birth of America was this idea that these things are self-evident, that our rights come from a creator, and that the creator has given us these attributes. And these are self-evident, these are inalienable, you can't be taken away. They're given by the creator. And what's amazing about that as it relates to the civil society is it's actually the kingdom coming and the building of the kingdom is those who seek to do what the Father says and to stay connected to. The more people that do this is a transformation of society. And I look at the origins of this stuff of why a lot of people came to America and why a lot of people came out of this, and they built a foundation to say, hold on a second, this isn't an anarchy. This
No.
isn't a place to go your own way. This is actually a place in which we are embracing the internal tether, which is obedience to every word that comes out of the mouth of the Father. And I think the origin of this was based on that core, is to say, what would it look like if there was a place where people actually did their very best to consider others in addition to themselves, right? To love God and to love others. And what would that look like if we were connected to the vine and obedient to that? You said it many times to me. How would you animate a system of government? How would you animate a system of finance? How would you animate a system of laws? How would you animate a system of security? Steve, this has been really amazing.
That is fundamental, Matt. And I'll leave you maybe with this, unless we end up in another.
3 hours.
Who knows what's going to happen? But do you know that in the kingdom of God, there's no such word as obedience? There's no such word. Can you imagine folks in heaven and standing before the Father's throne and him having to tell them to obey him?
No.
There is no such word. There's no concept of obedience. There is just a partnership, a living together. It is the with word.
Yeah. With is so much more powerful because you're right. Obedience is basically,
It's a subjection word.
yeah, it's a subjection word. That's exactly right. You're subject to me. I am ruling. I'm an authoritarian over you. And what you're saying is no. When you see yourself as a son, and now we come back to the prodigal son.
Yep.
He just was like, maybe my father will take me back as a slave. And it's like, no. He comes out and he puts a ring on you. You are to rule with him. You are a descendant. You are a son. And that's, when you say we've forgotten who we are,
Yeah.
it's so easy to fall back into it. But this stuff is it's so enlightening too, in the sense that you're like, hold on a second, there's a whole different way of living. Because if I were to summarize this whole thing, it's be able to identify, and Jesus will help you identify what the offers are of you going your own way. It's constantly, like literally crouching at the door. Like it is constantly being offered up to us in this idea that, hold on, these are offers that we do not have to accept.
No, we do not give them standing. Can you imagine for a minute if Biden's cabinet all of a sudden got together and said, "Hey guys, we've got some pretty tough stuff going on. Why don't we try something different by asking Jesus if he has an idea of how to deal with this?"
Well, and it's like a lot of people wouldn't be caught dead doing that because they were worried what people would think of them.
They're not interested.
No.
They're just no, I don't want to do that. I want to make the decision.
Well,
I want to be the ruler.
And if you think that you're lower than the angels, you're like, well, I don't really have any power anyway. And it's like this self-fulfilling prophecy. And obviously Satan's really crafty, man.
He's very crafty. So now we get to the Fed. What would happen if they did that? What if they got together and said, man, this thing is in a mess. Wonder if Jesus has any ideas about how to turn this, our financial system around. You think we might give him a shot at giving some input on this one?
Yeah.
Or how about a family that's in trouble? Or how a business, a farm, a school system, you name it. It is so practical, Matt. It's something you can step out from this stream and just simply say, Jesus, I have no clue what these guys are talking about. I'd like to know about it. Can you teach me how this thing works? I'm interested.
Well, and it doesn't come with any baggage.
No.
There's no what's amazing is I was just thinking of this dollar bill on the back. It says, "In God we trust."
Yeah.
And you think about that's actually, that motto was, I think 1958. It wasn't from the beginning. And it's really interesting because it really says something really, surprising about us, is that this foundation, because the answer to all of this, he has the answers to these things. And here we are claiming a form of godliness, but denying its power.
Yeah.
Wow. Steve?
Did we get your transaction question?
Yes, sir, we did. And of course, it invites even more questions. But I think the thing that I would say is, even though it's complex and it's a lot of words and it goes for 2 hours, the outcome is so simple. And it's a reminder that the yoke is easy and the burden is light. And that if you decide to go on this journey with him, that it's not to grind you into powder. It will refine you, but it is also one that it resonates as good. And to me, I've always come back to the fact that what is the product of all of this? I have peace in my heart. It's just like there's a currency of peace, and you go pretty much in any and every situation. And this has influenced my daily practice when I go home to the family. It's like I literally go, before I walk in, I'm like, all right, Jesus, please instruct me. And then you think about, our responsibilities in what he's entrusted to us, right? Stewardship. So there's a lot here, Steve, and I thank you so much for doing this again.
You bet.
Episode number 7. Anything else you want to share before we go?
Nah, let's just go learn to hit the curveball.
Hit the curveball. Folks, thanks for joining in. Let's just go hit the curveball. Oh, man. Love Steve so much. Man, it's so great. True freedom. What I've realized, I started doing these right side ups with Steve Staggs and doing these clips. And what I realized is there's so much packed in like every statement that Steve makes. And it's interesting is we call this right side up. And this just came from months and months of talking to Steve privately and realizing, okay. And we kind of started with this idea that this world is upside down really from the beginning. But at the core of it is the fact that we've given away our authority. Okay. So in this right side up world, right, we listen to a living Jesus. And I think it's really illustrated well when you think of like Biden's cabinet, as he was saying. You imagine that? But you know what's interesting is who has the confidence and who has the ability to literally stand up and say, um, Jesus is alive and he speaks. And every day from sunrise to sunset, I do my best to hold each thought captive to him. And I hold my tongue. I don't respond. I don't react. I don't get drawn off sides. I recognize that he's a shepherd and we recognize his voice. And if you don't start from that premise, and I think that's one of the big challenges, is I've gone through kind of this churchy experience since I was 28. And a lot of it, at least in this kind of Protestant Bible church kind of world, is, and it's not intentional, but it's an upside down concept, which is you need to come underneath the authority of the Bible. And I would never suggest that the Bible isn't useful, right? All scripture is God breathed and useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness, so that the man of God may be thoroughly equipped for every good work. But there's so much, and it's almost like it's been hidden. It's like we say, well, yeah, it's Easter Sunday, he's risen. But we're not recognizing that the model that Jesus provided while he was here was one of basically over and over and over saying, I don't do anything that, the Father hasn't basically told me to do. And I think this is really well illustrated in the first miracle that was documented in the Gospels, and that's the water into wine. And I've always been confused why Jesus's mother comes to him and goes, "Hey, they ran out of wine," and he's like, "Woman, my time has not yet come." And I was kind of confused by that, but now it makes total sense. He's like, "I don't do anything except what the Father tells me to do." And it's interesting that, Steve is just practicing the same thing, but with this model has been like blaring if you see it, right? Jesus comes out of the wilderness and Satan tempts him. Why is that recorded? And he says, no. He's like, turn these stones into bread, right? Give me your authority. He's like, no, man does not live on bread alone, but out of every word that comes out of the mouth of God. And you know what? To me, this renaissance and revolution that Steve has introduced to me is to say, you don't believe that Jesus is alive, and you don't believe that he would speak to you. And what did Steve say? Hey, I spent 40 years. He applied the way God made him to asking these questions. Hey, Jesus, how do you see this? And what happened? He kept hearing from Jesus. And a lot of times, which is amazing, is that things come from, start with requests. Hey, we want Mike Ostel's eye to be clear, like crystal clear, right? And I want that for Mike. I really do. But what I don't realize is that Jesus's plan and the things that he likely is teaching Mike through cloudy vision is like, what I want to like get in the way of that? No. Jesus, how do you see his lack of seeing? No, likely will get remedied and he's going to be able to see. Great. And I'll rejoice and say, that's awesome. I'm so glad that you can read because you love to read. But it's like, okay, I'm so focused on myself. I'm so focused on the things I want. But just imagine if there were leaders in Texas, in our country, across the world who said, and I wonder how people would respond. How are you going to lead? I don't know if you saw this, but in the UK, they had a big election and the Labour Party won, a big landslide, right? And people think it's moving left. And what I think is interesting is they made this promise that we're going to get back to serving the people. That's kind of their theme. And I was thinking about this. Well, you're basically saying, hey, I'm smart. I'm going to serve you. And it sounds good. But what's amazing is God sends the lion and the bear for us to fight. And what is so weird is this upside down world is like, well, I've got this education and this thing, and I know what's best, and you need to vote me in, and I'll be this leader. And what is so revolutionary about what Steve said is, you can do nothing without me, right? John 15:5. I'm the vine, you are the branches. Without me, you can do nothing. or you can't do anything. And think about that. Well, yeah, you could probably go get lunch somewhere, right? Make a choice and go make lunch. But as far as the things that are eternally significant, we can't do anything without them. And I think a lot of people would say, well, those things are past. That's gone. There's no speaking anymore. And you know what? It's not true. It's a lie. Well, what's the whole point? What's Satan's whole deal? To lie to you. And folks, I'm telling you, there's a movement that's happening. I was at a 4th of July party yesterday, and a good friend I talk to him like every time we go to different parties and everything. He's such an amazing guy. His name's Mark. And I just kind of mentioned this stuff. He's like, yeah, I saw you have this YouTube channel and all that. He's just being nice. And what was so cool about Mark is he was experiencing the same things. He had different vocabulary, but Jesus is revealing this stuff across the board. This isn't exclusive to Steve Staggs. But what's amazing is Steve, in his practice, he would say to me so many times, he's like, Matt, listen, I'm just here telling you my story. And what I loved about that, it wasn't like you need to follow the Steve Staggs way of doing things. No, you follow the Jesus way of doing things. Go ask him yourself, Matt. And did you notice he corrected me at the end of that? And I loved it. I used the term obedience, and it was the wrong word. And what did he say? He didn't say, okay, and like stomp on me neck. You're wrong. He said, hey, do you know that the word obedience the concept doesn't exist in the kingdom? And when you understand that, you're like, hold on. Well, when your kid does something wrong, or do you kill them? Like if you have children, this is a great example of this. Like when somebody does something that's not right in your family, do you kill them? No, you don't. You correct them. You guide them. You think about this shepherding thing. Like, do we see God as this judge with a big hammer? Or do we see him as a loving father who's like, there's all kinds of things that I can help you learn from. Are you interested in knowing how I see this? And I've always been blown away by this idea of consider it pure joy when facing troubles of many kinds, trials. That seems really odd and so counterintuitive. And that's the whole thing. It seems counterintuitive because the world is upside down. It's counter to this. And there's so many things to say, hey, be in the world, which we are, but not of it. And it's like these things are just jumping off the page, right? They're literally, you're like, wow, these things are fitting together and they're simple. And I think that's really, what can we do, right? We can use a different vocabulary, but at the end of the day, we have to be interested. And that's why that story of Jesus telling the agricultural story of the seed falling on different types of soil. And most people are like, hey, that's great. Good job, Jesus. And they went home. But there's a group of people like, what you talking about, Willis? And they literally chased after him. They're like, what do you mean by that? And he called them the ecclesia, being called out of something. So think about this, being called out of the world and its upside down nature and called to Jesus, who's going to give you the right side up perspective, his perspective. I've said this before, but Steve came to the Gen Con and he gave a talk about the high places. One of the amazing things he said is you have to see that we're seated with him in the heavenlies. So let's just think about this. Let's say heaven is up, right? And the earth is down. That so often in man's ways builds the altar, right? Builds these gods, builds these poles, builds these high places, and we look up to them. And they're man-made. And it's so the counterintuitive nature of things to say, no, you're seated with me. And if we do this together, I'm going to show you how I see these things. You might see them from a worldly view as bad, as difficult, as a problem, as a trial, but I see them differently. And what happens when you see something anew? I was going through a really big challenge, and I thought, oh, all is lost. And I literally had a dream, and the Lord spoke to me and said, it's not falling apart, it's falling in place. Like, how does that work? And you realize, okay, you're using all of these things. And I think we generically kind of call it a redemptive thread. It's like, it's weird how this worked, but here I find myself and you used all of these things to show me this. So you're not just, meek and mild Jesus. No, this is the framework. And we could get into some other things, but we'll probably do that with our buddy ZZ Tesco because he's always a good guy to have a chat with. But I want to thank you guys for coming in. This is from a clip from episode 7. There are 37 episodes, 2 hours apiece, on my channel. They're in a podcast format, which means they also can work as audio. And you can go through those at any time. And it's in a playlist called Right Side Up with Steve Sachs. So all of that's there. We're on episode 60. So since episode 38, right, when Steve passed, we've been kind of doing this, picking out these clips and going, hey, let's revisit this. And what's amazing is Ray and I were talking about this prior to this, and we're like, oh my goodness, like it's the truth. And when you probe the truth, it's like multifaceted and you see new things. And it's like, I may have covered this ground many, many times before, but in the context of what he's doing, right? These trials that we're going through, we see it anew. And it's like, it's life giving. And what is its currency? Its currency is not power, its currency is peace. And what do we want? It's amazing. So, folks, ZZ Tesco is in the house. What's up, buddy? Does your audio work?
Yes.
Hey, good, good. What'd you think of all that? Ray, I'm dumbfounded every time. Like, I'll watch that or listen to it privately, and then I listen to it on the stream, and I'm like, I get something new every time. What about you?
Yes.
What
Just kidding.
did you get on this live stream from watching
You know,
that?
the camera comes on, you get nervous, you're just like,
Yeah. Frozen?
frozen. I like your shoes.
No, what did you take from all that? Any observations?
There's so many things that I get from what Steve said because, here's the thing, and I this is no disrespect to Steve at all. It's not Steve's message.
No, it's
Steve,
not.
Steve communicated this message, but it's almost as if I'm learning something that Jesus wants me to learn from Steve.
Right. Oh, no, that's
And
exactly it.
He used Steve to do it because I needed to hear it from a guy like Steve. And he also modeled it out.
Yeah.
Which I think is, really cool because,
Well, I think if we talk to his friends, like Stephen Root and the guys that have journeyed with him since the mid '80s, this is, you're refined over time by the heat of this, and you and I've talked many times. What type of men do we want to be, right? What type of fathers do we want to be? What type of friends we want to be? And we recognize that this is a constant sun up to sundown thing, and that I think the church is really great at onboarding us. But it's like we presented this thing like, you made it, you're saved. And you're like, hold on a second, there's a lot more to this thing. And Steve kind of used the concept of crab walking. So I guess in baseball, you have to do the training, right? So in order to have all the right muscles and all the right experience, there's just fundamentals that you have to do. And I think what's really amazing is in order to run after Jesus, you got to be able to run. And to be in the game, you have to have a certain, facility. And, we have interest. That's the starting point. But it's like, this is a real thing. And it is a real activity. And it is a real partnership. And I think a lot of times people just are like, well, he's God. He's everywhere. He's just going to take care of everything. Well, I think from a macro perspective, that's probably right. He's going to accomplish what he's going to accomplish. And he even said it. He said, I'm creating and completing. When he speaks, he's creating and completing. And it's like, wow. Like, why does your brain or your soul, or why do you understand something anew? And just like you said, like, why is it that, because I think in the church, you're like, well, you can't learn anything from anyone who is not approved as a pastoral person. And you're like, no, I learn stuff from Ray all the time.
He is not approved.
Amen.
I know, right? No,
we're encouraging each other, right? I mean, that's the whole point of this thing.
We are, but it's interesting because like reading through the Old Testament. So again, we're doing this as a family, which I love doing. But many times it says in there, God uses who he wills to teach the people. He's like, um, the nation of Israel is there to drive out the other nations. And he's like, okay, um, could God have just taken his hand and smoothed the whole area out and then put them in there with no enemies? None of that? None of the peoples over there? No, because he said, I'm going to use these other nations to continue to teach you lessons, Israel,
And what it's like to do it with me.
and what it's like to do it with me, and what it's like to do it without me when you decide to go your own way. And that part blows me away, because he knows the future. He knows what a complete um, universe is going to look like, and yet he allows us to go through the pain points and the things that help bring this stuff out as we learn to do things in his nature and character. Like, wow.
Well, and it has so much. The cool thing about this, you know, Ray and I have been doing this together for 23 years now, and basically every morning to go and, hey, let's talk about Jesus, and then to have Steve come in, it's such a, for me, it's so profound because it has some sort of trajectory to it. You know, I mentioned John Burke and his interviews with all those people of their near death experiences, and basically the commonalities between all of those things is literally like it's true. This is Jesus. This is like, you know, it's something that you don't think it is. It's way greater. And of course, we know from the scriptures that, it's hard to recognize him because he's so counter to the world and the culture. And I think if you recognize that it is upside down, and that's really kind of the real simple things is Steve said that Jesus gave him a new vocabulary. And I just appreciate the fact that Steve was patient enough and willing enough to take the time to help me understand a little bit of what that vocabulary is. But in light of its holiness, in light of its amazing, fruit, because that's the thing I'm just testifying to. That's why we do this, is because I see this in practice in my life, and I'm like, I haven't been doing it very long. Steve did this for 40 years, and you think about it, like, wow. And what I love about Steve is he wasn't like, "Oh, I'm a prophet. You need to send me money." He didn't like go his own way and go, I'm gonna use this Jesus guy as a mechanism for my power, control, money, or anything. He's like, no, it's called to men of the transfer. And he spent the time one-on-one. I have such respect for that because I've seen so many kind of charlatans going, I'm gonna take these things that are true, but I'm gonna use them for my own benefit. And I think that's why people look at Christian people and they're like, you're hypocrites. And it's so common is that you're taking something out that is good and pure, and you're bringing it into this upside down world, and you're using it for your own glory. And it's amazing. It's just absolutely amazing. And I just imagine, and let me ask you this question, Ray. I think there's a time coming. Do you believe there's a time coming where we're going to see people of real courage stepping up and saying, I'm going to lead in the nature and character of Jesus. I'm going to lead my family this way. I'm going to lead my company this way. I'm going to lead my country this way, or my HOA this way, whatever it is. What would it look like if a group of people stopped for a second and said, "Hey, Jesus, how do you see this thing?" The result of it I've seen is way more patience, right, in my own life, but then also a loving correction. Like, I feel like it's amazing. Like, I don't feel like God is like, "You're wrong." It's more like Jesus, well, Steve modeled it. I think a lot of the way that, well, Jesus modeled to him. It wasn't judgment. It was correction and guidance, and like, hey, you want to see this way? And I
Well,
mean, I'm trying to use the words I can to articulate it.
I love what you said, because it's the call to action for a lot of us to go,
Yeah.
what if we did this? First of all, I want to say it's going to look like Texas, Matt.
That's right.
Y'all are welcome to come here.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding.
It could.
Some of the people I think are actually starting to do it. When you even start looking at some of the states that have said, "Hey, we want to put the 10 Commandments back in schools. We want to put 10 Commandments back into our courthouses," and it make a stand for the fact that we know that there is intelligence beyond our own, and we need that.
Well,
We need
and
God to look down on us
well,
and help us.
so crazy about this is that's the governor of Oklahoma. He basically said it's important for the kids to have access to at least the historic literature is I think how he approached it of the Bible, just because it's the basis of civil society. I don't know that I've seen people lead in a way because imagine I think people are scared to have this risk of saying, "Oh, you hear from God? Oh, do you?" And I think that people did that to Steve all the time. They're like, "Oh, yeah, is that what you do?" And I think on at first blush, most people would say, "Oh, yeah, Jesus is alive and he speaks. That's great." And you're like, "No, you're serious? Like you're actually going to listen to him and do what
Wait,
he says?"
yeah.
And I think
So
what's really cool is it works at all levels, but I think it's very, very threatening to anyone who's built a system because they're like, what is Jesus going to say about this system I built for my own glory? That it's worthless. That's scary to people, man. And what are like it's like the guy who want to go back in the Matrix. I don't want to remember nothing. It's like, wow. I feel like so much of it, so many of us are living in that way. And it's like there's this whole life and the fullness of life with peace and all of the fruit that comes from following and listening to the living Jesus. And there's so many illustrations of it that we've seen. We talked about Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel and his buddies. It's so amazing. I've always felt like, well, Daniel was a prophet. That's why he was listening to God. He had direct access, and he was way better than you and me, Ray. No, he was buddies with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they knew that they were going to kill all of these seers and sorcerers and everything, and they were going to get caught up in that. And they asked God Himself. They said, "Hey, what does this dream mean?" And they literally praised God. They're like, "Hey, thanks, man. Appreciate that." He's the source. And so many of us want to be the source. And that's when I look at all this self-help stuff and I see these people are like, you need to be alpha and all this. These are the 12 strategies, the 47 strategies of power. And you need to learn these things from, and it's like, yeah, if you want to participate in the upside down world and you want to extract value from people and you want to crush them, yeah, you can do that. But you're giving away your authority to the forces of evil. And it's like, that's why, it's funny is people talk about the gospel is good news. That's good news.
yeah,
Jesus alive and he speaks and you can go directly to him. That's good news. Because it's not limited by rank or riverbank. It's like, it's incredible, dude.
yeah.
Anyway, I'm sorry. You go ahead.
It is.
Tell me other observations that you had or thoughts.
Well, I'm gonna parade my complete lack of faith because
We can relate.
I think the biggest reason why I don't witness to people, and I'll just say it that way because I don't know how else to say it, is that I know the things that God's done in my life, but am I confident that He's going to do the same thing in someone else's life?
Yeah.
Or are they going to come back and be pissed off at me because I told them about something that doesn't work for them? You know what I mean? And
Yeah,
I know that
you're
sounds.
displaying your lack of faith. Yeah.
I know.
Well, and
Now,
it's fear. We're afraid of being judged by people. It
yeah,
takes courage. This is the crab walking. I mean, it really takes some intestinal fortitude. Let's step across the chalk line and get in the game because it's real life stuff. Like that's the thing I think people don't realize is you come up against the evil forces and you back down and get back in the stance. You're like, oh, I can't handle this.
well, so can I speak to that for a second? Because one of the things that I thought was so cool of what Steve said is that God. Okay, so in James, right, it says, "Consider it pure joy, right, when you face trials of many kinds." That, of course, now I completely draw a blank, so I have it right here. Knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. Now, what's funny is I've memorized the first chapter of James. I've known it for years. Can do it cold, except when I get on a live stream. So that's just great. So knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And then even further than that, verse 4, and let endurance have its perfect result so that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. And it's weird because, and I do like the fact that Steve said, I don't want to just take language for what I think it is. And there's been some people who have said that subverting the English language is one of the greatest hindrances to the gospel because we've muddled up every word, right? Just look at love. I love pizza. I love chicken. I love F1. I
Yeah.
love my wife. I love God. But those are all different things, right?
Yeah.
But it's the same word. So perfect. I'm like, well, I have to be perfect. What does that mean? It means everything has to be right. Okay, well, that may be true. That's a definition of it, but it's also completeness. And that God sees things from his perspective, that our whole universe is complete the way he wants it to be. We just don't see it yet because we're in a timeline. We see it from a timeline perspective. He sees it from a whole complete perspective. And that even as you drill down, Mandelbrot's theory, as you drill down into our lives, our entire life was continually refining to make us complete in him because he's got work for us to do. And I mean, Steve's life seems to be great evidence of that. You become a baseball player. Well, to us, I mean, us that have never done that, it's like, whoa, that's like the greatest thing ever. Like you've made it, and then once you get there, he's looking around and he's like, is this all there is?
Yeah.
And God says, no, are you interested in something else? And the greatest journey that Steve ever had was walking with Jesus every day. And so I just think it's so cool to know that, we don't have somebody up there just, so God is not looking around and going, well, okay, somebody did that. Now I got to react to that. And, oh, somebody did that. Oh, I didn't know that they were going to make this policy. And boy, those red people are going to be mad. What about the blue people?
Yeah.
He goes, no, I'm fashioning and forming all of this so that it'll be complete when I think it's ready. And so when Steve was ready, God took him. And I just, when you talk about peace, it's peaceful to me to know that God has a plan even when I don't have a plan. And I don't even know I don't know how to say that, but we're stuck in this context of everything making it's like running in mud, and I think that's intentional ever since the sin was crouching at the door. Cain, what are you going to do?
Yeah. What I like about what you're saying, Ray, is you're recognizing what I think we all recognize. If we take this at face value and we say all there is this accident of evolution, and here you are, right? Because the lie is saying you don't really matter. You're just a newt, right? You're just a descendant of a primate. And what I think is amazing about this is obviously we see dimly and that we will see fully. But Steve would always say to me, these are, we're spiritual beings having a physical experience, right? It's two sides of the same coin. And that, I think what's really interesting is the concept of a veil, right? What is a veil? But it's something that shields the view. And we've often talked for years, even before meeting Steve, that the veil is very, very thin, but there is a veil. And, we're on one side of it. But what Steve showed was with interest, right? With interest, he's going to show you things through that veil and will speak to you. And there's so much of it that it's almost like we've disregarded. It's shocking to me. I've heard so many sermons over the years, but I've never heard this one. Like, why is that? Why is that I've heard little pieces of things, but I've never heard this one like, I only do what I see the Father doing. Man does not live on bread alone, but out of every word. So I live on the words that come out of his mouth. Peter, James, and John go up the mountain of transfiguration. to pray. They were literally went up to pray, and Jesus's face looked like lightning. You know what lightning looks like? That's like bright white. And they're like shocked by this, and he's talking to Moses and Elijah. And you're like, and then a cloud comes over them, which probably freaks them out. And they're like, hey, should we build you like, tabernacles or tents or like some sort of shelters? And a voice comes from heaven and says, this is my son, listen to him. And it's like we've thrown out this thing and we've accepted this. We've basically said, well, no, Jesus isn't speaking anymore. He's actually he's a really nice historical figure. Just read your Bible and, kind of pray for what you want. And what's amazing is the people I've met that are mature, right? And that's the word from James, right? So I looked at, this is the detail on that word, the definition, having reached its end, complete, perfect, complete in all its parts, full grown, of full age, specifically of the completeness of Christian character. And you think about this idea of being perfect is that this endurance, and I think about it, how do we build muscle? My son's, he's going through that time when you're 13, if you know what I'm saying. And he's becoming like things are changing in him. And he's like, Dad, I can lift more and I'm faster. And like he's seeing these things mature in him. And of course, old man Crypto Heartbeat's like, just get ready, my friend. It's going to hit you like a ton of bricks. But you're becoming mature in this stuff. And I feel like a lot of what I was told was like, congratulations, you're saved. You got fire insurance. Now go on your way, son. And there's been, people talk about discipleship, but this is a whole different thing to say, there's guidance, like moment by moment of holding these thoughts captive to a living and speaking Jesus. And you go, and so let me toss something out. Tell me what you think of this. There have been discoveries, there have been breakthroughs, there have been inventions, there have been all kinds of things that have kind of come out of nowhere. And a lot of those, strangely, have come out of people of faith. And it's really interesting when you like dive into stuff like, Michelangelo painting, right? And these aren't all Christian people, right? There's so many people, Einstein, whatever. So many people say, oh yeah, I had a dream and I saw this. And I was talking to my buddy Mark yesterday, and he goes, it's this mystery. And what Steve came and said, no, it's not a mystery at all. Are you interested in knowing? Because he knows it all. And here's the crazy part. I think we're so, if you're somebody that believes, you're like, there's a reverent fear of God. You're like, well, he's only really interested in the really important things and the big things and people's health and, nations. Well, what Steve made accessible to me was the fact that he's interested in everything. Like, what are you interested in? He made you, he fashioned you as a purpose. Like, hey, what are you concerned about? What are you interested in? What do you want to know about? And I think it's really, really spelled out when you see people like the woman who had been bleeding for 12 years. And she's like, if I just touch the hem of his garment. And it literally said power went out of him and he was amazed by her faith. Well, that's happening today. It didn't like stop. Like this idea that without faith, it's impossible to please God. Well, where's it come from? It comes from him speaking into your life, and he hands you that like atomic packet of faith, which helps you endure. And what does endurance do, according to James? It creates this fullness of maturity, which what's the byproduct of that? Peace that transcends all understanding. And I'm like, that's really what we're looking for. And that's what's so amazing to me is I think the other side of this is Satan's desire. He says, give me your authority and I'll give you power. And we see people all across the world hoarding and lording because they've given over their authority and exchanged it for power. Because what did Satan offer Jesus himself? He wanted to give him everything. It's like, you can't give me something I already have. It's amazing, dude. It's amazing. But I just hope that, Steve was convinced that there are tens of thousands of people across the planet who are seeking and interested in listening, and the implications of this. And I'm seeing that to be true. It comes in different forms of language, but the transfer is the transfer of the man, the transfer of you and me. And so what does it look like when your household is blessed by you because you're leading it in his nature and character? It's not like you go like, "Oh, I got to be king." No, you got to be you. And you've seen that in your own life, haven't you? You don't do it
Yeah,
always right. I don't do it always right, but you see the fruit of that when you're like, "No, I'm going to follow Jesus."
I love it. Our pastor said the other day, he goes, Jesus died for your sins, not your personality. And by that, he means that we all have different personalities that are wonderful gifts from God to be able to do things in his nature and character. But we had a sin problem that Jesus took care of for us. Well, and does. I mean, that's amazing. And you said it earlier. It's true freedom. I know we talk about it was Independence Day, and you mentioned this
Yep.
earlier. You said it's Independence Day, but what is true freedom?
Well, even the
And
term independence, what it means to most people in the upside down world. I get to go my own way and make my own darn choices.
yeah, do what I want.
Yeah.
Um, but if you didn't know Jesus, right, you only think things are a certain way, and you're kind of stuck in the running in the muck, because you don't know that there's any other way. Then then you encounter Jesus, right? Some people would say you get saved. You come to that moment of, wait a minute, Jesus has got to, but I'm not him, and
Yeah.
Jesus, I need you, and you take that first step of being interested and walking in his direction. And then he says, no, you now have a choice to do the things that I want you to do or the things that I don't want you to do. You can do it with me or without me. Well, I didn't even know I had a choice to do that before.
You know what is
And then,
funny? I don't know that there are things that he doesn't want you to do. It's a
well, you know what I mean.
partnership. No, I
I mean,
do. I do.
sin. I mean, I don't want to sin against God, right? I don't want to go my own way, do my own things against him.
But
Not
he
going to
made
murder people.
but he made that. He didn't make those choices. He made your ability to choose. I think
Right.
what's incredible about this is, do you know Jesus? You know, and this is like this churchy language. Well, if you know Jesus, then you know. And I'm like, I'm just getting to know the guy. And what's funny is everybody say, well, you get saved, you know Jesus. And it's like, are you a believer? I'm like, well, the evidence isn't always the case. But what's really crazy is I listen to Steve talk about this, or I talk with you, and I know him a little better. And what's really crazy is I almost feel like we got to stop saying, you know Jesus. Well, you could know about Jesus, but this is a process of following him. And what's crazy about it is you don't know the next thing that he's going to speak to you, because in his speaking, he's going to create and complete. And I think what's so interesting is I think that's part of the lie, that he is stationary. Oh, I know him. Oh, I know him. I know Jesus. And then that's like a passcode. Like, oh, you're in. Okay, I trust you. And you're like, no, I make all kinds of terrible decisions. I go my way all the time. Sin is creeping, crouching at the door, and I give my authority away all the time. And I'm like, okay, I'm not going to be a slave to sin, but I need you, Ray. I need a friend. I need a Steve. I need reminders. I need people in the community. Like, that's the whole
Yeah.
beauty of, quote unquote, this community thing that we're doing together, is to remind yourself, if we knew Jesus, we'd have it all figured out. And it's like, no, this is a process by which we practice holding these thoughts captive. And the only reason I say them is because I don't do it really well and I want to do it better. But I almost feel like I learn about Jesus every time I talk to you, Ray. But to say
Well,
I know him
right.
is like, I don't know if I could ever in my lifetime even, like, you know what I'm saying? Jesus is so much. And to say I know him is almost like this, like, it's like a phony word that we use to be like, yeah, I'm part of the group.
Well, I'm certainly in the realm of learning things the way Steve would say it. I'm still a little more in the churchy
Yeah.
world than
I
you
don't,
would be.
I don't know
But I
about that.
think the point that I was making was it's true freedom to know that first of all we have that choice to make decisions with Jesus,
And we have access to him.
and we have access to him. And then after that, Now it's just learning how to crab walk, learning how to practice. You know, like crab walking is not easy. I try to do it, and my arms are not strong enough.
Yeah.
I am not. There's a friend of ours who literally lifts over 425 pounds. Like, just
Strong like bull.
I can't even. I can't even imagine that. That's two. That's over two. Well, at least over two of me, if not more. You
It's
know,
crazy.
but I love the idea of when things are going great, we forget about Jesus.
Yeah.
And when things are, and I don't like to admit that, but I do, because I realize that my dependence is on the things around me, not who he is. Okay, I got everything covered. Okay, this is this way because I planned all these things, perfectly. The execution was great. But Jesus is like, wait a minute, we got to the 4th of July yesterday, and we were just sitting there about to watch the fireworks, and the thought went through my head, Jesus, did I do this with you today?
Hmm.
Did I even ask you about things today? Did I talk to you about those things? And I thought, that's true freedom for me, is to be able to engage with Jesus, ask him these things, and that I'm not alone. There's freedom in knowing that I'm not alone in this world. And he
Yeah.
brings friends like you, he brings Steve to us, and to take the whole, I was looking back over the past, 23 years that you and I have actually been working together, and seeing all these different people, these different situations that we've been through. And then here we are, we're at the house over there, the other office, and we're looking up and we're going, it's like the veil is thin. That was our language at the time. And it was 2019. And we're like, well, the veil is thin. But what we were really saying, and we didn't even know it, was, Jesus, we're interested in what's on the other side of the veil. And we're interested in in the fact that we're not alone doing this, and that there's freedom in knowing that we can be engaged in what you want us to do, and that we can be part of that. And that
Well,
was,
yeah, and what's so cool is he's not gonna pound you on the head. That's the other thing that I think is so incredible is the patience and grace of God to go, you know, yeah. Steve said it many times. He's like, "So when you brought your daughter home, what language did she speak from the hospital?" And it sounds so funny. Yeah, and it's like, but there was communication there.
Yeah.
And, the fact that Jesus is patient with us, but that it only requires interest, so often we're like, yeah, I want to hear from Jesus if it's according to what I want. And then if I get something from him, I just run my own way with it. And it's so classic. Steve said many times, he said that in business, a lot of times, guys that are, Christian businessmen are like, yeah, let's seek the Lord, let's pray. But then they get some sort of word from the Lord or some direction or some sense of where to go. And they're like, okay, I'll take it from here. And that's the biggest issue is like, if Jesus speaks, you can take it to the bank. But so many times we're like, well, okay, he said this, but now let's go back into this upside down world and try to figure out, well, like, you're like, do you not know who I am? And I think that's just what's so interesting is he uses these things to refine us. And,
Well,
I think I'm reminded to to ask him constantly, hey, I need more clarification on what did you really mean by this? And and the other thing is, I think we present that, especially in a business context, as like that's not real work. That's not a business strategy. Listening to Jesus. Oh, what do you, And I thought about that. Like this conferring with Jesus is actually probably the best business practice you could have, because what would it look like if people sought Jesus you know, in the marketplace and in government and in finance and all these things? It's funny. I had a guy say to me, you know, you may not want to be a Christian and follow Jesus, but you sure as hell want me to be. And think
yeah,
about that. Yeah, you want me to be. Why? Because you know that the things that you're going to do are going to be, truthful. Those things are going to be fair. And you start thinking about this like everybody wants you to be Jesus. They just don't want to do it to themselves. They want you to treat them fairly and have even weights and measures. They want you to be gracious. They want you to be, just and fair, thoughtful and truthful. It's amazing. Like all of this stuff is I feel like it's coming to a head. Anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead, Ray.
No, not at all, not at all. I mean, so it's meeting Steve. When we went up there, and I think if I remember correctly, when we met him, it was the place over by White Rock Lake over there, where we went on the east side of Dallas.
Yeah. Oh
And,
yeah. Yeah. That Carter Hill was there, man. If it wasn't
Yeah,
for
he
Carter,
was.
we would have never met him.
That's right. And I remember at the time there were just things going wrong. I think I was driving at the time, or no, we would look for
Like a Walgreens, I think.
we were looking for Walgreens. We were trying to find that. Oh, there's one down there. I mean, it was like all this stuff was just happening before what happened we get there. And then, like, I remember looking over and Steve was standing there, and I think you were either sitting down and talking to somebody, and then you turn around, and then Carter introduced you to Steve, and it's like, I remember seeing Steve for the first time. This is me seeing Steve for the first time, and I'm like, okay, like hearing his voice, like seeing him for the first time. I'm like, man, he's got something to say.
Well,
And
it's so true, and it's so what's amazing is like a prophet in your own country. I think about I got to meet a lot of friends of Steve and meet his family and all that stuff, and they experienced their dad, right? Their dad, Steve, and of course I didn't have that, and so you recognize it in its contrast. And literally, when I met him, his vocal intonation was unique. The way he said words was intriguing to me. And I didn't meet it. You don't meet like people all the time where you're like, just the very way you fashion words and shake the air when you speak is interesting. And it's really bizarre, but it's so interesting because I don't think that these things they're certainly not by accident, but I don't think they're as rare as I think they are. This idea that we're interested and and many times we've talked about this, Ray, as we've engaged with people in the community, is we've always felt like God was using the money, the crypto and all this stuff as a means to make his name known. The goal isn't you get rich and win Lambo, but no, this is a mechanism by which people will come together and they'll cast aside some preconceived notions because they're like, hey, let's get rich together. That's kind of this undertone of the crypto sphere, especially during the last bull run. And so to meet Carter and Steve there and to have this experience, it's like Jesus punching through the veil, and it's like, listen to this guy. I'm like, is he an angel? And the messenger of that message to us, and then it still gives, on episode 60, it blows your mind, but it's just a constant reminder of the same simple thing. Are you interested? Are you interested? Ask him yourself and try it on for size. And Steve said right at the end of that episode 7, he's like, we got to just get off of this so people can just go practice. Just go ask him, hey, are the things these idiots are saying that I think are idiots, is this real or not? Don't listen to us. We're just fumbling through this too, but he is the source. And it's crazy. I have to say this every time. If you want to meet the kid down the street that just moved in, you don't go read a book about him. You go introduce yourself and you go, hey, my name's Ray. My name's Matt. My name's Carter. How you doing? And that's it.
No, there's a whole magazine series about me, Matt. It was Mad Magazine.
Yes, I remember that very well.
Now it was it's kind of just say this way, we were also meant to meet Steve. And it's funny because we always look at it from our perspective and go, well, I was meant to meet Steve, and Steve was going to impart all this wisdom, because I've heard you say that, that meeting Steve was great. And I thought maybe he was an angel and that he imparts all this stuff to me and helps me learn these things. But when you look at all these episodes and the number of people who've been reached just this way, Steve was also meant to meet us. And how God brought that together.
Well, and he he said that too. He said that many times, and it wasn't really us. Is more of he's like the reason he came to the crypto thing. Like if we had Carter on here, he would say like the reason that probably Steve, and I think there's some detail what Carter shared the time he was on. He was like, yeah, I don't know that Steve really wanted to come out at night, you know? And there was something about, hey, this crypto guys. And in the context in which I had talked to Carter before that was kind of, it wasn't really related to Texan. It's just like some crypto guys are coming into Dallas. And, you know, I know likely what happened was, you know, probably Steve was like, well, I can hang out here at the house, or all right, Jesus, what do you want me to do? He probably said, hey, why don't you go and check this thing out? And to think that from very, very small beginnings like that are such impact in things is so incredible. But there's so much value, right? So, you know, his kids, the family, you know, these things are documented now. That's good, right? Just, you know, what I would give, Ray, to have 1 hour of video of my dad just talking. He could talk about nothing and I would be fixated just because I want to hear my dad's voice. Just to hear it. That's it. Like, I don't care what he's
Yeah.
talking about. I just miss my dad, you know?
Oh man.
And to think
you're-
that we've got this, but then it's tied all to Jesus. And it's, you know, we talked about what kind of men do we want to be? I want to be like Steve, man. I want to be like Steve. And what is that? Well, it's more like Jesus, right? It's like a guy that's at peace. Didn't have a panic button. Dude, I got this crazy panic button. And it's not good. Like I'm like, please take this panic button away from me. And it's like, but I just imagine what this journey is like, and the gift that he's given us is that he's modeled something. But that's what Jesus did when he was here too. What did he do? He's like, hey, let me show you this. Let me show you how this works. And you said it the other day. You told me the story because I was having a hard time, and you told me the story of Lazarus. And you go, yeah, they made sure he was good and dead. Right? That was like stinking. You know, he's like rotting. He's like, all right, folks, watch what I'm about to do. You're like, well, he's making his name known through so many different sources in so many different ways, and through Steve and through Ray and through Carter and through all these things. And it's almost like it's the nicest way you can yell at someone. Meaning he's making it, hello, I'm here. Try me on for size. I love that Zacchaeus was short and he climbed a tree. He was so interested. I love
Yeah, I did too.
that.
But
my goodness.
you know what I'm excited for, Matt, though, is that the people. So, and if you're listening to this, and if you're still here,
There are 69 people across 3 platforms, right? So that's more than the 7 that has been just on YouTube.
I'm excited to walk with you, because that means that you're hearing the message that Jesus is going to do something great, and he's doing something great, and we have an opportunity to walk with him. And I can't even imagine. I mean, I've seen the times in my own life when I've listened to Jesus, and there are times when I know that I'm like, okay, I should do that. Okay, no, I don't want to do that. And then there are times when I'm like, okay, Jesus, how do you see this? Okay, all right, I'll do that. And how cool that would be, and how transformative it's been in my life. I trust that Jesus is going to do the same thing in your life too.
And that's what he does. Clearly, is what he's been doing since the very beginning. All things are created for him and by him. You're like, who do you want to be partnered with? I want to be partnered with a guy who knows it all. And you know what's interesting is Jesus doing something great? Well, what is great to me, and that's I think the biggest aha for me, Ray, is that I've defined great in the context of my own comfort. And what I'm recognizing is that actually how the system works is sometimes he sends you a lion and a bear. I mean, we've become really soft. I was talking to that guy, Mark, I was mentioning, and he asked me, he's like, I started reading Lonesome Dove. Remember, it was made into like a TV series and it won all these like Emmys or stuff. But he says, I read the book, and he said, my daughter was reading it. And so she's like, hey, Dad, you need to read this. And he said, people back then were extremely hardy. They did not like live very long. It was dangerous. But like, if you needed something, you had to like go chop the wood. And we've been so kind of satiated with like, especially in the first world, especially in America, and we've become soft. And I think that if we look at what's happening in the world and being, in the game, there's a lot of components of this that require that you move. like that you do crab walk. And I'm that's one thing that I'm kind of being confronted with is your intellect may be with me, but is your body?
Or your body's evidence that your intellect trusts what you're thinking about.
Well, and let me ask you this. I mean, if you can't fit through the door, it's tough to get out into the world.
Oh man. Okay, so why do you think? I mean, can we talk about the sludge for a second? Not that I want to talk about sludge, but this this whole context that we're living in right now is created to keep us from. Well, I mean, it's what did you the way you said it was to regulate.
Oh, the
Like, what
upside
did you?
down world, the systems that Satan is in control of, yeah, they are enslaving us.
But
That's not how they were created to be. That's why that's the upside down. That's the evidence of the upside down world.
it's amazing to me that someone else's envy can also enslave me too.
Yeah.
Because if I give in to that and give that my authority, I'm becoming part of their story of enslaving me.
You're reacting to them. Yeah. Proaction versus reaction. And that's what's so amazing about this. We joke about this a lot because I have this happen a lot. When my wife needs me to do something, she sets her hair on fire. And all you can see is the smoke and the smell of burning hair. And I'm running with that analogy here.
Like the Hunger
But
Games.
so many people that don't have power or don't have the ability, to affect things will overreact and try to get you to overreact so that you can be manipulated to doing what they want. And it's so prevalent in our culture. It's drawing people off sides. It's like, well, no. Okay. Step back a second. All right. There are real problems that need real solutions. But in a way, as soon as we react to them, we've given our authority away to that emotion. Right. And Steve said many times, he's like, emotions are not inherently evil. They're actually there to inform, but they're not there to rule. You are there to
Mhm.
rule. And it's so great. This hierarchy of what is the Father's mission? What's his purpose? Right? And then how do we relate to him in the context of all of that stuff? And you start to understand it and you're like, okay, the body has many parts. Why are there so many people? Why is Ray really good at this type of fire, putting out these fires? Why is he really good at coding? And why is he really good at understanding how things fit together? And why is he really good at solving these issues? And it's like, I don't want to just be whipsawed. I don't want like this, like, it's like a rope's tied around my neck and it's hooked to all sorts of people and they just yank on you and your neck's like, ah, no, clip this stuff. No, Jesus, I'm going to follow you. That means that you're informing these things because you're proactive. I'm not going to react to things. That's why Steve over 40 years didn't have a panic button because he recognized that nothing exists outside the context of Jesus' will. Like he's in charge. And what does that like result in? Like gives you rest. But then there's this really interesting duality, which is to say, what are you interested in Jesus speaking into? Are you only interested in speaking into your business and your money? Are you interested in speaking into your marriage? What about your own physical activity? What about what you put in your mouth? What about the things that you are self-medicating with? What about all these things? Well, he has something to say about all that stuff. Are you interested? Well, I don't know that I want to expose this part of this thing because that requires real effort and work. I want things to be easy. Give me a bunch of money so I don't have to worry about it, and then I'll just go hole up somewhere. And you're like, there's a reason it's not coming to you, my friend, because it's not the way it's structured. It's like, all right, and if you're in the game, be ready. There are going to be lots of challenges, lots of lions and lots of bears. But it's like the road to destruction is wide. And it's interesting. We talked about this the other day too. Pick up your cross and follow me daily. I missed the word daily forever. I hear this whole idea, pick up your cross and follow me. Okay, and that seems like kind of Sunday school Jesus. Daily is a really interesting word because what it says to me is this is an ongoing, constant intention and interest. And so much of this is, I think, kind of cultural Christianity in the West is like, well, it's we onboard you at Vacation Bible School. Oh, check the box. You accepted Jesus and you know him now. Ah, you know everything about him now. Well, obviously that's not true. And then it's like, and that's what I was concerned about when I was 12. It's like, we want to get a notch on our belt. We got you, or at least we got the, assumption we got you. And then it's like, yeah, you're on your own because we're just in the business of onboarding. We're not in the business of this practice. And that's what I think I was so frustrated about is like, there's got to be a structure and a way to do this. And then to think that, yeah, it's you and him. Like you can go to him. I'm like, okay, this is awesome. So it's really a function of my interest, period, and your interest. And you can say, and he will respect, I have no interest. It's totally fine. Cain slew his brother Abel and killed him. Your choice. Yeah. People shot up that bowling alley and killed like 16 people in Maine. Where was Jesus? Well, you animated a tool in your nature and character. You went your own way. But so often I don't think we think about these things of like, thanks Jesus for giving me a little insight. I'll take it from here. No, that's not how it works.
Yeah.
And we wonder why we're hitting our head against the wall. It's like, it's almost like, Ray, I've always joked with you, like, I feel like we've been cut in on the deal. Like he's like giving us like this secret. And it's like, no, it shouldn't be a mystery. I've been yelling it at you for like all of creation, the heavens declare. I've sent you 66 books. I've sent you all kinds of people. And it's like, well, Kairos, appointed time. I really, truly believe all things are being exposed here, and we're going to see more and more of this. And the question is, he taught us to pray, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Where? On earth as it is in heaven. All right. Well, we still got breath here. We're in the game. All right. What do you got next? Let's hold every thought captive and go, all right. Because I'll tell you what, if you and I are in leadership and we're committed to asking Jesus how he sees every situation, is everybody be like, well, I'll vote for that? Well, if you knew it was good for you, you would. Why? Because men will disappoint you because they'll go their own way. That's corruption, man. That's what we have. That's the upside down world. Hoarding and lording. It's amazing.
Oh, it is amazing.
It is.
Learning to hit the curveball.
That's right.
How
cool is that? I've never experienced that. But can you imagine some 85 mile an hour ball just go whoop and drop off the table? I've never had any a professional pitcher pitch something to me like that. Have you?
I wouldn't hit it. I mean,
Steve said it he was 12 or something, and the older kids, somebody threw a curveball at him, and he's like, "What in the world just happened?"
Just fell off the table. It's funny on Netflix. There's a show about Yogi Berra and his life.
Yeah.
Oh man, it's definitely kind of worth watching, but you kind of see how. And every once in a while, you'll run into this the anomaly or the outlier that nobody wants to talk about.
Yeah.
Or that breaks the paradigm. And one of the biggest criticisms of him was that, well, he just didn't look like a baseball player.
Right.
He wasn't the baseball player. Like, this is our model of the way we're building the Major League Baseball player.
They
doesn't look like him.
Yeah, they criticized Steve. Steve said he was one of the smallest guys in the entire league.
And they characterized him as a cartoon. They did all this kind of stuff. And you know what? He, instead of getting mad about it, he just took it and beat them with the scoreboard and kept putting up his numbers and was just winning. And he didn't even know how. He just had the attitude of we can all do this if we work together. But the thing that when you talk about hitting curveballs, the thing that sticks out in my mind about Yogi Berra and his hitting is that he would say, well, I just hit all the balls that whether it was in the strike zone or not. I didn't care if it was in the strike zone. I just learned how to hit balls inside the strike zone, outside the strike zone. And if you look, most of his, a lot of his hits were outside the strike zone. So it was like, well, I didn't, wait for the perfect pitch every time. And so we get this idea in life that things are going to be easy,
Yeah.
and it's like, no, learn how to hit the curveball, learn how to hit the balls that are outside the strike zone too. And that's how you get on base.
That's
And it's
that,
like, wow.
that's strong, Ray.
So you mean to tell me that when things don't go my way, Jesus is completing me? I'm like, yeah. Listen, you and I have seen a lot of curveballs this year.
Yeah.
And
And folks that have been watching are experiencing those curveballs like right now.
And
There's yeah.
And it seems like you're not even ready for the like you still think that the catcher still has the other curveball, like the ball sitting in his mitt, like he just caught it, and there's another curveball coming at you, and you're like, how did that happen? Like that pitcher's got a windmill for an arm, And,
well, you know what I've dealt with, Ray, and you've seen it in my own life. It's like, yeah, it's almost they call them curveball, call them arrows, call them any projectile that's coming at you that's purpose is to harm you, and you get to the point where it overwhelms you, and then you give it your authority and overreact, and then you know what I hear? I hear the demonic say, you ought to just kill yourself. And I know so many people that deal with this stuff, right? They deal with this stuff and they're like, where's this coming from? Right. Well, and I think if the demonic is concerned about you, you're a threat. And this idea of being in the game, it's like Steve taught me one of the greatest things ever. He said, Jesus, only you have the authority to speak to me. Satan, you have no standing here. And he will flee from you. And that's real. I've experienced that multiple times. And, I'm always like, when I overreact to stuff or I, get hot tempered or whatever it means. And I'm just like, dang, like took me right out of the game. It's like, but these things, the grace of God and all of this, and then the learning of this stuff and the reminder, Steve was just a man like us, but he was so willing to patiently listen. I mean, I just think about if I were to take all the times, like since let's take since 1984, every hour of Steve being awake, okay, and the amount of people that he sat and listened to talk, meaning he did not say a word. I don't know that most of us could bear it, and he was just right there. And if you asked his wife, I'll bet she would say, I mean, he had a phone attached to his ear, and most of the time he wasn't talking. And think about that. He knew that Jesus was going to do the work. And he would always say to me, he'd be like, hey, Matt, you open to a different way of looking at this? Basically, I asked Jesus about this previously, and let me let you know what he said. Or I just asked him, and he said something to me that might be helpful to you. He never forced himself on me. It's just amazing, man. And that's why it's such a gift. And that's why I continue to do this on Fridays. And thank you, Ray, for coming in and having this conversation. It's like we need models, we need reminders, we need community. We need to be like, hey, it's gonna be okay. And if you're somebody out there that's really, really struggling with these things, you have choice. Are you interested? Period. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Ray. Thank you, Carter. Thank you, Jesus. Folks, this has been Right Side Up in honor of Steve Staggs, episode 30. True freedom. The only true freedom is freedom in Christ. Hey, are you interested? He's alive and he speaks. Take care, everybody, and don't mess with Texas. Have a great weekend. Thanks, Mr. Ray.
Thank you. Glad to be here.